She stopped writing in February. Emily said it quietly while staring at the rusted suitcase sitting on her kitchen table. The metal corners were scratched white with age, and one of the locks hung slightly crooked like it had been forced open years ago and closed again in a hurry. Outside the apartment window, rain slid slowly down the glass while traffic moved through downtown Toledo beneath cold orange streetlights. The storage facility manager had warned her the suitcase smelled old. He forgot to mention it smelled like memory. Emily hadn't spoken her sister's name out loud in almost 3 years before tonight. Sarah Carter. The girl who disappeared 19 winters ago without goodbye. Without explanation. Without coming back. People in town called it running away. Emily called it abandonment. For most of her adult life, hatred felt easier than grief. Easier than admitting she waited every birthday hoping Sarah might suddenly call. Easier than wondering why someone who practically raised her could vanish so completely. Emily rested both hands against the kitchen counter and looked toward the suitcase again. She still hadn't fully opened it. Part of her didn't want to. Because unopened things still leave room for anger. But truth changes people. And something about the suitcase felt wrong in a way she couldn't explain yet. Too heavy. Too careful. Like someone spent years protecting what was hidden inside. Emily slowly reached toward the rusted lock while thunder rolled softly somewhere beyond the rain-covered city. What she didn't know yet, was that the sister she hated for nearly 2 decades had never actually stopped watching over her at all. The suitcase had been sitting on Emily Carter's kitchen table for almost 2 hours before she finally touched the lock. Rain pressed softly against the apartment windows while traffic hissed through wet downtown streets below. Somewhere in the building next door, a television laughed too loudly through thin walls. Emily stood barefoot near the sink with both arms folded tightly across her chest, staring at the rusted metal case like it might suddenly explain itself if she waited long enough. It looked smaller than she expected. Older too. One corner carried deep scratches beneath faded brown paint, and the leather handle had nearly split apart from years of use. A faded baggage tag still hung from one latch with Sarah Carter typed in smudged black letters almost erased by time. Emily hated that seeing her sister's name still did something physical to her after 19 years. Tightened her throat. Pulled old anger awake. She walked slowly toward the table and sat down beneath the weak yellow kitchen light. The apartment smelled faintly like diner grease from her uniform jacket hanging near the door. She had just finished a double shift at Miller's Family Grill before the storage facility called. At first she almost ignored the voicemail completely. Then she heard the words next of kin and abandoned unit. After that, she couldn't stop listening. The manager explained everything in a bored voice that sounded practiced from years handling forgotten lives. A woman named Sarah Carter had died 3 weeks earlier in Duluth, Minnesota. Minimal personal belongings. No spouse. No children. One storage locker left unpaid. One suitcase marked with Emily's address inside. Emily remembered gripping the edge of the diner counter after hearing it. Not grief exactly. More like an old wound somebody touched without warning. Sarah was dead. Just like that. After 19 years of silence. No apology. No explanation. Just a rusted suitcase arriving in Toledo during spring rain. Emily rested her fingers against the cold metal latch now but didn't open it yet. Instead she looked around the apartment quietly. Tiny kitchen. Faded linoleum floors. Bills stacked beside the microwave. A pair of orthopedic shoes drying near the radiator after work. Nothing inside the room belonged to the life she once imagined having. At 38 years old, Emily still worked night shifts serving coffee to truck drivers and exhausted nurses while trying not to think too hard about how quickly time disappeared. Her marriage lasted 4 years before collapsing beneath money problems and emotional distance neither she nor Daniel knew how to fix. No children. No savings worth mentioning. Just long work hours and Silence waiting at home afterward. Sometimes she blamed Sarah for all of it. Irrationally maybe. But abandonment changed people in ways that never fully healed. Emily grew up believing her older sister would always stay. Sarah practically raised her after their mother died from pneumonia when Emily was 9 years old. Their father spent most nights drunk inside a recliner smelling like beer and cigarette smoke while Sarah cooked dinner, helped with homework, worked factory shifts after school, and tucked Emily into bed during winter storms when electricity cut out across the trailer park. Sarah became everything their mother no longer could. Which made what happened later feel even crueler. Emily still remembered the morning she woke up and found Sarah gone. 19 years old. No goodbye. No note. Closet empty except for 2 wire hangers swinging slightly beside the wall. Their father screaming through the trailer while throwing beer bottles against cabinets. Emily standing frozen in pajamas wondering how someone could love you enough to raise you, then leave without looking back. The resentment stayed after that. Year after year. Christmases passed. Birthdays disappeared. Sarah never returned. Sometimes postcards arrived from random cities during the first couple years. Montana. Nebraska. Wyoming. No return addresses. Short sentences written in rushed handwriting. Hope you're okay. Proud of you. Emily tore most of them up without responding. Eventually the postcards stopped too. Rain rolled harder against the apartment windows outside. Emily finally pulled the suitcase closer across the table. The rusted latch resisted at first before giving way with a sharp metallic click. Dust lifted softly into the kitchen air when she opened the lid. The smell hit immediately. Old paper. Cedar. Faint cigarette smoke trapped inside fabric for years. Emily froze. Folded carefully inside the suitcase sat dozens of envelopes tied together with faded blue ribbon. Every single one carried her name written across the front in Sarah's handwriting. Emily Carter. Some envelopes looked yellowed with age. Others newer. Different stamps. Different states. Different years. Her chest tightened unexpectedly. She picked one up carefully. Postmarked February 2008. Another from 2011. Another from 2015. 19 years of letters. None opened. None mailed. Emily stared silently at the stacks filling the suitcase while rainwater crawled slowly down the apartment glass behind her. "What the hell were you doing?" she whispered softly. Beneath the letters sat other objects packed neatly in layers. A small jewelry box. Old photographs. Receipts folded into envelopes. A worn blue scarf Emily recognized instantly from childhood winters at the trailer park. Her hand started trembling slightly while sorting through everything. Nothing inside looked random. Sarah packed the suitcase carefully. Intentionally. Like she knew someone would eventually open it after she was gone. Emily untied the ribbon around the oldest stack of letters and removed the first envelope slowly. Her name stared back at her in Sarah's familiar slanted handwriting. Emily remembered watching those same hands braid her hair before elementary school. Teaching her multiplication tables. Wrapping blankets tighter around both of them during cold Ohio winters when the trailer heater stopped working again. She swallowed hard and opened the envelope carefully. Inside sat 3 pages written on lined notebook paper folded perfectly into thirds. Emily hesitated before reading. Part of her suddenly didn't want answers anymore. Anger felt simpler. Cleaner somehow. But she already crossed too far into the past now to stop. She unfolded the pages slowly beneath the yellow kitchen light. The first sentence hit harder than she expected. "Emily, I know you hate me already." Emily lowered the letter immediately and closed her eyes for a second. Outside, thunder rolled softly somewhere beyond the city. She took a breath and forced herself to continue reading. Sarah's handwriting looked rushed but steady. She wrote about Minnesota winters. Factory jobs. Cheap apartments. Long bus rides between states. But every paragraph circled back toward Emily somehow. Wondering if you graduated. Wondering if you still bite your nails when nervous. Wondering if Dad still drinks coffee black after midnight. Emily stopped. Reading halfway through and looked away toward the rain-covered windows. Her throat hurt suddenly. Not because the letter apologized. It didn't. That almost made it worse. Sarah wrote like someone talking to family across a distance she no longer believed could be repaired. Calm. Careful. Lonely. Emily flipped toward the last page slowly. Near the bottom Sarah had written one final sentence smaller than the others. I kept thinking one day you'd hate me less. Emily stared at those words for a long time without moving. The kitchen felt strangely quiet now except for rain tapping gently against the glass and the low hum of the refrigerator behind her. Eventually she folded the letter back along its original creases and reached deeper into the suitcase again. Beneath the stacks of envelopes sat an old silver necklace broken clean through the center. Emily stopped breathing for half a second after seeing it. Sarah's necklace. The matching one their mother gave them before she died. Emily still wore her own half tucked inside the jewelry drawer near the bed. Sarah always promised they would put them back together someday. Emily touched the broken chain carefully while memories moved softly through the apartment around her. Trailer park summers. Fireflies near the railroad tracks. Sarah carrying groceries home in both arms after factory shifts. Sarah singing quietly beside the stove while making canned soup feel like dinner. Emily suddenly realized something deeply unsettling then. Sarah never threw anything away connected to her. Not one thing. Outside, rain continued falling steadily across Toledo while the old suitcase sat open beneath the kitchen light like a wound finally deciding to speak. Emily did not sleep that night. The rain finally stopped sometime after 2 in the morning, but the apartment remained filled with the quiet sound of dripping gutters and distant traffic moving across wet Toledo streets. The rusted suitcase stayed open on the kitchen table beneath the weak yellow light while stacks of Sarah's letters surrounded it like evidence from a life nobody had bothered to witness properly. Emily sat wrapped in an old gray sweater with cold coffee. Untouched beside her elbow, reading until sunrise slowly turned the apartment windows pale blue. Each letter felt less like communication and more like fragments of a person trapped inside time. Sarah never wrote dramatically. That unsettled Emily more than if she had. No begging for forgiveness. No emotional speeches. Just details. Factory shifts in Kansas City. Cleaning motel rooms in Fargo. Sleeping inside a church basement during one winter in Omaha after losing a job. Tiny pieces of survival written carefully between ordinary sentences asking whether Emily still liked strawberry pancakes or whether she finally stopped biting her nails while nervous. It felt impossible somehow that someone could disappear so completely while still thinking about another person every day. Around 6:30, Emily folded one of the letters slowly and stared toward the apartment window where dawn light revealed cracked parking lots below and buses beginning their morning routes through the city. Her diner shift started in less than an hour. Normally she would already be getting dressed by now. Instead she remained motionless at the kitchen table with 19 years sitting open in front of her. She looked down at another envelope dated May 2009. The handwriting seemed shakier there. Inside, Sarah described working at a poultry processing plant outside Des Moines. 12-hour shifts. Frozen fingers. Migraines from chemical smells. But even then, buried near the bottom of the page, she wrote, I saw a little girl at the grocery store today who looked just like you when you were 10. Same angry eyebrows. Emily laughed softly despite herself. The sound startled her. She could not remember the last time something connected to Sarah made her laugh instead of ache. Her phone buzzed suddenly across the counter. Darlene from the diner. Emily stared at the screen before answering. You coming in? Darlene asked immediately over loud kitchen noise in the background. Emily rubbed her eyes tiredly. I don't think so today. Silence. You sick? Emily looked toward the suitcase. Something like that. Darlene's voice softened slightly. You never call off. Emily almost explained everything. Then. The letters. Sarah. The suitcase. But the story still felt too strange and unfinished to speak aloud yet. Family thing, she answered quietly instead. Darlene understood enough not to push further. After hanging up, Emily stood slowly and walked toward the bedroom. The apartment carried the stale stillness of a place someone only used for sleeping between work shifts. Clothes folded carefully because replacing them cost money. Cheap framed artwork hanging slightly crooked near the hallway. Silence pressed into every room. Emily stopped beside the dresser and opened the top drawer slowly. Beneath old receipts and tangled charger cords sat her half of the silver necklace Sarah once promised they would keep forever. Emily picked it up carefully. The chain looked darker now with age. Tarnished around the edges. She remembered the summer afternoon their mother gave them matching halves beside Lake Erie 2 weeks before getting sick. So you girls always know where home is, their mother had joked softly while fastening them around their necks. Sarah cried at the funeral. Emily didn't. She had been too young to understand death fully then. Sarah understood enough for both of them. Afterward, their father started drinking heavier. Days blurred together inside the trailer park after that. Cigarette smoke trapped in curtains. Utility shut-off notices taped to the door. Empty beer bottles rolling across kitchen floors at night. Sarah became 20 years old overnight. She packed Emily's school lunches. Braided her hair before class. Worked evening factory shifts while still finishing homework at the kitchen table under flickering lights. Emily remembered waking during thunderstorms and finding Sarah sitting awake beside the window counting money from her paycheck with tears silently running down her face because the electric bill cost more than expected again. But every morning Sarah still smiled before school like exhaustion was temporary. Emily sat on the edge of the bed now holding the necklace while old memories moved carefully through the apartment around her. For years she protected herself by remembering only the ending. Sarah leaving. Sarah disappearing. Sarah choosing freedom over family. Hatred simplified grief into something survivable. But the letters complicated everything. Around noon, Emily returned to the kitchen and began sorting through the suitcase more carefully. Beneath the letters she discovered envelopes filled with receipts, bus tickets, motel invoices, and money order stubs stretching back almost 2 decades. Most were small amounts. $40. $60. Sometimes $100. Every single money order listed the same recipient name. Harold Carter. Their father. Emily stared at the stack silently. Their father spent years claiming Sarah abandoned them completely. Claimed she never cared enough to send help. But there it was. Proof she had been mailing money all along. Emily sat down slowly. Her father died 5 years earlier from liver failure in a county hospital outside Toledo. Emily handled the funeral alone because there was nobody else left to call. She remembered cleaning out his trailer afterward while discovering thousands of dollars missing from unpaid bills and gambling debts. At the time she blamed Sarah for disappearing and leaving everything on her shoulders. Now another possibility began forming quietly beneath the anger. What if Sarah had been trying to help the entire time? Emily grabbed another envelope with trembling hands. Inside sat a folded note attached to a money order receipt dated November 2012. Dad, please make sure Emily gets winter boots this year. The trailer heater worried me last time, she wrote. Emily stopped breathing for a second after reading it. Last time, she wrote. Emily never wrote Sarah after the postcards stopped. Not once. Which meant Sarah learned information somehow through other people. Neighbors maybe. Old trailer park friends. Hidden observer fragments. Emily suddenly felt watched by love she spent 19 years refusing to see. The realization unsettled her deeply. She continued digging through the suitcase until late afternoon shadows filled the apartment. Near the bottom she discovered a worn notebook wrapped carefully inside plastic. Sarah's journal. Emily hesitated before opening it. Unlike the letters, this felt private in a way that almost frightened her. But curiosity pulled harder now than resentment ever had. The first pages described ordinary survival. Job applications. Bus schedules. Cheap apartments. Then deeper into the notebook, the writing changed. More tired. More honest. January 14th. Emily turned 16 today. I drove 6 hours after work just to sit outside her school parking lot for 10 minutes because I couldn't stop wondering what she looked like now. Emily lowered the notebook slowly into her lap. A cold feeling moved through her chest. Sarah had been there. Somewhere nearby. Watching from distance all those years while Emily built an entire identity around being abandoned. Another entry appeared several pages later. June 2nd. Saw her graduation picture in the newspaper clipping Mrs. Donahue mailed me. She looks angry in every photograph now. That part might still be my fault. Emily covered her mouth briefly while reading. Outside, afternoon sunlight faded behind heavy gray clouds rolling back across the city. She kept turning pages. Sarah tracked birthdays. Addresses. Old diner locations where Emily worked. Newspaper announcements about her wedding. Then finally one entry written 3 years earlier made Emily stop completely. I saw her outside St. Luke's Hospital tonight crying alone beside the parking garage after Dad died. I almost walked over. God help me, I almost did. Emily remembered that night instantly. Standing alone in freezing rain after signing hospice paperwork while believing she had nobody left in the world anymore. Sarah had been there. Close enough to see her cry. But she never approached. Emily closed the journal and stared across the apartment silently while daylight disappeared outside. For the first time in 19 years, her anger no longer felt solid. It felt unstable. Cracking quietly beneath the weight of things she did not yet fully understand. And somewhere deep inside the rusted suitcase still resting open beneath the kitchen light, more truth waited patiently for her to keep digging. The journal changed everything slowly instead of all at once. That was the hardest part. Emily kept expecting some dramatic confession buried inside Sarah's handwriting. Some single explanation that would suddenly reorganize 19 years of pain into something easier to survive. But the truth arrived quietly instead. In pieces. In bus tickets taped beside grocery receipts. In exhausted journal entries written after midnight shifts. In ordinary loneliness spread across pages nobody was ever supposed to read. 3 days passed before Emily returned to work at Miller's Family Grill. By then the apartment looked less like a home and more like an archive. Letters covered the kitchen table in careful stacks organized by year while Sarah's old journal remained open beside cold coffee cups and untouched meals Emily kept forgetting to finish. Rain had finally cleared from Toledo, leaving behind pale spring sunlight that exposed every flaw inside the apartment. Dust along baseboards. Cracked paint near the ceiling. The exhaustion beneath Emily's eyes each morning when she caught her reflection passing the hallway mirror. At the diner, life continued exactly as before. Truck drivers complained about gas prices. Teenagers laughed too loudly in corner booths after school. The coffee machine hissed constantly behind the counter while old country songs played softly through ceiling speakers. Emily moved through her shift automatically carrying plates and refilling mugs, but something inside her no longer fit comfortably beneath routine. Sarah followed her everywhere now. Not physically. Through memory. Through realization. Through the unbearable understanding that her sister had spent nearly 2 decades surviving invisibly beside the edges of her life. Around midnight, Darlene cornered her near the dish station while cooks shouted orders through the kitchen window. "You look terrible," she muttered gently. Emily kept wiping coffee cups without looking up. "Thanks. I'm serious." Darlene lowered her voice. "What happened?" Emily hesitated before finally answering. "My sister died." Darlene stopped moving. In 4 years working together, Emily barely mentioned family beyond brief complaints about her father before he passed. "I didn't know you had a sister." Emily laughed softly under her breath. "Neither did I." Darlene studied her carefully. For a moment before squeezing her shoulder once and walking away without another question. Emily appreciated that more than comfort. Most grief became unbearable once people started trying too hard to fix it. After her shift ended at 2:30 in the morning, Emily drove aimlessly through Toledo instead of going home. The city looked softer at night. Empty intersections glowing beneath traffic lights. Laundromats still open for people whose lives required strange hours. Bus stops carrying exhausted workers beneath flickering signs. Sarah spent years inside places exactly like these, Emily realized. Cheap motels. Night buses. Small apartments nobody remembered after tenants moved out. An invisible life. Emily parked near Lake Erie just before dawn and sat inside the car listening to waves strike dark rocks beneath gray morning sky. She remembered being children there once. Sarah stealing French fries from her paper tray while promising they would leave the trailer park together someday. "We're gonna live somewhere with real windows," Sarah joked back then. "And heat that actually works." Emily smiled faintly at the memory before sadness settled over it again. Sarah never escaped poverty. The journal made that painfully clear. She simply carried it somewhere else. Later that afternoon, Emily opened another section of the suitcase she had mostly avoided until now. Beneath the journals and letters sat a smaller envelope marked important in Sarah's handwriting. Inside were medical documents. Prescription receipts. Hospital discharge summaries from Minnesota and Wisconsin. Emily read slowly through unfamiliar terms and appointment dates while cold unease spread through her chest. Sarah had been sick for years. Lung disease first. Then complications. Then something worse, the paperwork described in language clinical enough to feel cruel. Terminal diagnosis confirmed 14 months ago. Emily lowered the papers carefully onto the table. 14 months. Sarah knew she was dying. And still she never contacted her directly. That realization hurt differently than abandonment ever did. Abandonment felt angry. This felt lonely. Emily kept reading. Most appointments happened at free clinics or county hospitals. There were notes about missed treatments because of work schedules. Generic prescriptions because insurance lapsed. A social worker recommendation for assisted housing Sarah apparently never followed through on. One receipt showed payment for a storage unit renewed every month for nearly 7 years despite overdue medical bills everywhere else. Emily stared at the number quietly. Sarah protected the suitcase longer than she protected herself. Why? The answer arrived partially inside another journal entry dated 11 months earlier. "If something happens to me before I figure out how to explain everything, at least she'll know I never forgot her." Emily closed the notebook immediately after reading that line. The apartment suddenly felt too small to breathe inside. She walked toward the bathroom and splashed cold water against her face while afternoon sunlight drifted weakly through frosted glass. Her reflection looked older lately. Not physically. Emotionally. Like grief had begun rearranging the architecture beneath her skin. That evening Emily called the Minnesota storage facility again. The manager transferred her to a woman named Linda who handled Sarah's final paperwork after the county coroner released her belongings. Linda spoke kindly in the careful tone people use around strangers carrying fresh grief. She didn't have much, Linda explained. Small apartment. Mostly books and clothes. Emily hesitated before asking quietly, Did she talk about family? Silence crackled briefly through the phone line. You mean you? Emily swallowed. Yeah. Linda exhaled softly. All the time. Emily closed her eyes. Linda continued gently. Your sister worked nights cleaning offices downtown. She brought your name up constantly. Emily leaned against the kitchen counter while listening. What did she say? Another pause. Mostly stories. Linda's voice warmed slightly. About you liking strawberry pancakes as a kid. About your high school graduation. About a necklace your mother gave you both. Emily looked immediately toward the broken silver chain still resting beside the suitcase. She kept newspaper clippings too, Linda added. Quietly. Pictures of your wedding. Articles from Toledo. Little things. Emily felt something crack softly inside her chest then. Sarah built an entire hidden life around remembering her. 19 years of distance. 19 years of silence. Yet somehow Emily remained the center of it anyway. Did she ever say why she left? Emily finally whispered. Linda grew quieter after that. No, she answered carefully. But sometimes near closing she'd sit outside the office smoking cigarettes and staring at old photographs for a long time. Emily listened silently. She looked like somebody carrying guilt heavier than luggage, Linda finished softly. After the call ended, evening settled slowly across the apartment. Emily stood alone near the kitchen window while sunset painted weak orange reflections across parked cars below. She suddenly remembered one particular winter night when she was 13. Their father had disappeared for 3 days during a gambling binge, leaving almost no food in the trailer. Emily woke around midnight and found Sarah sitting at the kitchen table crying silently while pretending to study factory paperwork. Back then Emily thought Sarah was just tired. Now she wondered how many burdens her sister carried without ever letting anyone fully see them. Hidden observer. Hidden suffering. Hidden love. Emily returned to the suitcase again after dark and discovered another envelope tucked carefully beneath the false lining near the bottom. Unlike the others, this one carried no date. Only her name written slowly across the front. Emily opened it carefully. Inside sat a photograph taken from far away. Emily froze immediately. The picture showed her standing outside St. Luke's Hospital 5 years earlier after their father died. Rain soaked her coat while she cried beside the parking garage under weak yellow lights. Emily remembered believing she was completely alone that night. But near the blurry edge of the photograph stood Sarah. Barely visible beneath an umbrella across the street. Watching. Emily sat down slowly at the kitchen table while tears finally slipped free before she could stop them. Not loud crying. Just quiet grief moving through. Years of misunderstanding all at once. She stared at the photograph for a long time afterward while darkness filled the apartment around her. Somewhere out there, Sarah spent 19 years staying close enough to witness her pain, but never close enough to ease it. And for the first time since opening the suitcase, Emily no longer wanted to ask why her sister left. She wanted to understand what could possibly make someone love another person enough to disappear from their life completely. Emily stopped answering calls from people for a while after that. Darlene left 2 voicemails asking whether she planned on returning to work. Her landlord taped a reminder notice near the mailboxes downstairs about overdue rent. One evening Daniel called unexpectedly after nearly 6 months of silence, probably because somebody from the diner mentioned Sarah's death online. Emily stared at the phone vibrating across the kitchen counter before muting it without answering. She no longer had energy for conversations requiring her to pretend she understood her own emotions. The apartment became smaller each day as the suitcase slowly unfolded more of Sarah's hidden life across every available surface. Receipts. Journals. Photographs. Bus schedules folded into envelopes. Tiny evidence that her sister spent 19 years moving quietly through America carrying memories heavier than luggage. By the second week, Emily developed a strange routine. She worked short shifts at the diner, came home after midnight, reheated soup she rarely finished eating, then sat beneath the yellow kitchen light reading Sarah's journals until sunrise. Sometimes she cried quietly. Sometimes she laughed unexpectedly at childhood stories Sarah remembered differently than she did. Most nights she simply sat still afterward staring toward the apartment window while Toledo slowly woke outside. The more Emily read, the more impossible it became to keep hating her sister the same way. But forgiveness frightened her too. Hatred at least gave shape to abandonment. Without it, all that remained was grief. One rainy Thursday around 3 a.m, Emily discovered another notebook hidden inside the lining. Beneath the suitcase lid. Smaller than the others. Black cover worn soft around the corners. Most entries were shorter. More exhausted somehow. Sarah wrote inside this one during the years her health began failing. November 3rd. Coughed blood again at work today. Didn't tell the supervisor. Need the hours. January 18th. Snowstorm trapped buses downtown. Slept inside laundromat beside two women arguing in Spanish all night. Dreamed about mom. Emily closed her eyes briefly after reading that one. She barely remembered their mother's voice anymore. Sarah carried it for both of them all these years. She kept turning pages slowly. March 27th. Saw Emily from across the street outside Miller's diner tonight. She still tucks her hair behind one ear when stressed. Wanted to walk inside. Couldn't do it. Emily stopped reading. Her stomach tightened hard enough to hurt. Miller's Family Grill sat less than 15 minutes from this apartment. Sarah had been there. Close enough to watch her through diner windows while she carried coffee pots between tables and complained about overtime to coworkers who never knew her sister sat across the street hidden inside darkness. Emily stood abruptly from the kitchen table and walked toward the window. Rainwater streaked softly down the glass while neon lights from the laundromat downstairs flickered across wet pavement. Somewhere nearby, a freight train moaned low through the city. Sarah had been here. Not years ago. Recently. The realization unsettled her more deeply than any letter so far. She returned slowly to the journal and continued reading. June 9th. Saw her arguing with Daniel outside the apartment building. She looked tired. Wanted to tell her she deserves softness from people. Emily swallowed hard. Daniel. Their marriage had already started collapsing then. Endless fights about money. About exhaustion. About how emotionally distant Emily became over the years without fully understanding why. She used to blame herself for never learning how to trust people completely. Now another possibility lingered quietly beneath everything. Maybe abandonment rewired love inside her long before Daniel arrived. Another page. October 14th. Sat in the back row at her wedding rehearsal. She looked beautiful. Left before she could see me. Emily stared at the sentence for several seconds without moving. Then slowly she lowered the notebook into her lap. Sarah attended her wedding. Not the ceremony itself. The rehearsal. Somewhere hidden inside the church while Emily practiced vows believing her sister had erased her completely from the world. Emily suddenly remembered one strange moment from that night. A woman near the back pew standing beside a pillar before disappearing during rehearsal dinner. At the time Emily barely noticed her. Now the memory returned sharper somehow. Sarah spent years orbiting her life like a ghost afraid to touch anything directly. The hidden observer. Always watching. Never arriving. Emily closed the notebook and pressed both hands over her face while emotion moved through her chest in heavy quiet waves. She did not understand how to carry this new version of Sarah yet. The selfish runaway sister from her memories no longer existed. In her place stood somebody lonelier. Sadder. More loving. And somehow that hurt worse. The next afternoon Emily drove out to the old trailer park where they grew up. She had not visited in almost 4 years since clearing out their father's belongings after his death. The place looked smaller now. Older. Rust stains beneath broken gutters. Sagging porches patched together with plywood and hope. Kids still rode bikes through cracked pavement while cigarette smoke drifted from open trailer doors despite the cold spring wind. Emily parked slowly beside lot 17. Their old trailer remained there, though somebody else lived inside now. The curtains had changed. So had the mailbox. But the narrow steps where Sarah once sat every night waiting for Emily to come home from school still leaned crooked toward the dirt exactly the same way. Emily stood beside the rusted fence quietly while memories moved through her like weather. Sarah packing school lunches before dawn. Sarah hiding overdue utility notices from Emily beneath couch cushions. Sarah pretending canned soup counted as dinner while secretly skipping meals herself. Across the street, an older woman. Watering dead flowers paused after recognizing her. Mrs. Donahue. Same cigarette voice. Same tired eyes. Emily Carter. Emily nodded slowly. Mrs. Donahue looked genuinely startled. Lord, haven't seen you in years. Emily managed a faint smile. Yeah. The older woman studied her face for a moment before asking quietly, You hear about Sarah? Emily froze slightly. You knew. Mrs. Donahue looked confused. Honey, she called me every few months. Emily stared silently while wind rattled loose aluminum siding nearby. She what? Mrs. Donahue set the watering can down carefully. Mostly asking about you. Wanted to know if you were okay. Emily felt something inside her chest sink slowly downward. She stayed in touch. Not often. Mrs. Donahue sighed softly. But enough. Then after a pause she added, she used to send money sometimes too. For your father. Emily lowered her eyes toward the dirt. Yeah. I found out. Mrs. Donahue watched her quietly for another second before speaking again. You know your sister slept in my laundry room one winter before she left for Minnesota? Emily looked up immediately. What? Your daddy threw her out after some gambling men came around asking questions. Mrs. Donahue's expression darkened slightly. Sarah wouldn't tell me much. Just said she needed to leave before things got worse. Emily's heartbeat slowed strangely after hearing that. Gambling men. The phrase lingered heavily in the air between them. Their father always carried debts. Everyone in the trailer park knew that. But Sarah never talked about it. Mrs. Donahue continued quietly, She loved you something fierce, though. Emily looked away toward the old trailer. Mrs. Donahue's voice softened further. That girl spent more time worrying about you than herself. Silence settled around them afterward except for wind moving through dead grass and children shouting somewhere down the road. Emily suddenly remembered another moment from childhood she had ignored for years. The night before Sarah disappeared, 2 unfamiliar men arrived outside the trailer yelling at their father near midnight. Emily woke frightened and found Sarah standing beside her bedroom door. Holding a baseball bat with both shaking hands while their father argued outside. Sarah smiled at her afterward and said everything was fine. Emily believed her because younger sisters always believe the older ones trying hardest not to look afraid. But now the memory returned differently. Sarah wasn't protecting herself that night. She was protecting Emily. The realization followed her all the way home. That evening she opened another envelope from the suitcase while sitting beside the apartment window during sunset. This letter was never sealed. Inside, Sarah had written only 2 pages before stopping halfway down the second. Emily, if anything ever happens to me before I explain why I left, please know this first. I never ran because I stopped loving you. Emily's hands tightened around the paper. The sentence ended there unfinished. Like Sarah could not force herself to continue. Outside, Orange evening light faded slowly across Toledo rooftops while traffic moved beneath distant street lamps. Emily folded the unfinished letter carefully and looked toward the suitcase resting open beneath the kitchen light. For 19 years she believed Sarah disappeared because she wanted freedom. But freedom didn't look like this. Freedom didn't spend decades watching somebody from shadows. Freedom didn't save old newspaper clippings or sit in church pews during weddings unseen. Freedom didn't die alone in Minnesota while paying monthly storage fees just to preserve proof that love existed. Something else happened 19 years ago. Something Sarah carried silently until death. And somewhere inside the rusted suitcase waiting patiently beneath layers of paper and memory, the full truth was finally beginning to breathe. The truth did not arrive dramatically. It arrived through exhaustion. Through faded receipts and unfinished sentences. Through the slow unbearable realization that Sarah Carter spent 19 years carrying fear quietly enough for everyone else to mistake it as abandonment. Emily understood that now in pieces, but the full shape of it still remained hidden somewhere beneath the suitcase's rusted hinges and carefully folded paper. 3 nights later. Toledo sat beneath another cold spring storm while Emily remained awake long past midnight reading beside the kitchen window. Thunder rolled softly across distant rooftops while rain blurred neon reflections through the glass. The apartment lights were off except for the small yellow lamp above the stove casting shadows across scattered journals and letters covering the table. Emily wore an oversized gray sweatshirt and thick socks against the cold floorboards, one hand wrapped around reheated coffee already gone bitter. She had reached the final stack of journals now. The later entries looked physically weaker. Handwriting less steady. Sentences shorter. Some pages stained by water rings or cigarette ash. Sarah had been getting sicker. Emily could see it happening line by line. February 12th. Couldn't finish shift tonight. Supervisor pretended not to notice when I sat down near the loading dock because I couldn't breathe right. March 3rd. Sent another money order for Dad's rent. Didn't have enough left for groceries this week, but he'll never tell Emily when things get bad. Emily closed her eyes briefly after reading that. Their father never once mentioned Sarah was still helping financially. Not once. Instead he spent years poisoning Emily against her. Calling Sarah selfish. Weak. Heartless. Back then Emily believed him because anger felt easier than asking harder questions. But now old memories kept shifting beneath new light. She remembered their father screaming Sarah's name drunkenly after she disappeared. Not like someone grieving a daughter. More like someone furious about losing control of something. Emily stared toward the rain-covered window while another childhood memory surfaced unexpectedly. She was 13. Sarah was 19. 2 men sat inside an old pickup truck parked across from the trailer for almost an hour late one night while their father paced nervously between the kitchen and porch chain-smoking cigarettes. Sarah kept checking the locks repeatedly before finally pulling Emily into the bedroom and whispering softly, "Don't come out no matter what happens." Emily remembered being frightened but too young to understand why. She remembered hearing shouting outside later. Their father begging somebody for more time. Then silence. By morning Sarah was gone. Emily slowly lowered the journal onto the table. Her heartbeat had become strangely heavy lately whenever the past rearranged itself like this. The trailer park no longer felt poor in memory. It felt dangerous. She reached deeper into the suitcase again and found another sealed envelope taped beneath the inner lining. This one looked different from the others. No address. No stamp. Just 3 words written carefully across the front. "If you're ready." Emily stared at the envelope for almost a full minute before opening it. Inside sat a folded legal document and one handwritten letter. Her stomach tightened immediately when she unfolded the paperwork first. Debt settlement agreement. Signed 19 years earlier. Harold Carter's name appeared across multiple pages beside signatures belonging to 2 men Emily didn't recognize. Several amounts had been crossed out in red ink. Final balance cleared upon transfer of collateral obligation. Emily frowned slowly while reading. Collateral obligation. The phrase felt cold. Wrong somehow. She turned the page over and noticed Sarah's signature at the bottom beneath a handwritten note. Debt assumed voluntarily. Emily's hand started trembling slightly. She grabbed the letter next. Sarah's handwriting looked rushed and uneven across the paper. Emily, if you found this, then I probably waited too long to tell you the truth. I didn't leave because I wanted freedom. Dad owed people money for years. More than you knew. The night before I disappeared, they came back drunk and angry. One of them kept looking at your bedroom door while they talked. Emily stopped breathing for a second. Rain hammered harder against the apartment windows outside while the refrigerator hummed quietly behind her. She forced herself to keep reading. Dad told them I could work off part of the debt if I stayed around. I knew what that meant. Emily covered her mouth instantly. Sarah's words blurred slightly through sudden tears. I packed my things before sunrise and left while you were sleeping because I thought if I disappeared first, eventually they'd stop coming around. Emily lowered the letter into her lap while silence filled the apartment around her. Not dramatic silence. Heavy silence. The kind that changed the shape of a person quietly from the inside. Sarah never ran away from responsibility. She ran toward danger so Emily wouldn't have to. The realization hit slowly and all at once. Emily stood abruptly from the table and walked toward the bathroom before emotion could fully reach her face. She gripped the sink tightly while staring at her reflection beneath dim light. 38 years old. Exhausted. Lonely. Carrying 19 years of resentment toward the one person who had actually been protecting her the entire time. She remembered Sarah teaching her how to braid her hair before school. Sarah sleeping beside her during thunderstorms because Emily hated lightning. Sarah pretending not to notice when Emily cried after kids mocked their thrift store clothes. Every memory suddenly changed meaning. Sarah was never escaping Emily. She was trying to save her. Emily slid slowly down against the bathroom wall until she sat on the cold tile floor with the letter shaking in her hands. Tears came quietly. Not dramatic sobbing. Just years of misunderstanding collapsing inward at once. Outside, the storm continued moving across Toledo while headlights drifted through rain below the apartment building. Sarah spent 19 years believing Emily hated her for leaving. And somehow she accepted that hatred because it kept Emily safe. Emily finally understood the unbearable tragedy hidden inside all those journals. Sarah chose to become the villain in her sister's story because the alternative terrified her more. An hour later, Emily returned to the kitchen table and forced herself to finish the letter. There's more I never told you because some truths felt too ugly to hand to somebody I loved. Dad begged me not to leave at first. Then he blamed me after anyway because blaming people was easier for him than changing. I kept thinking one day I'd come back once things calmed down. But after enough years passed, shame started feeling permanent. Emily wiped her eyes quietly and continued reading. Beneath the weak kitchen light. I watched your life from far away because seeing you okay became the only thing that made leaving survivable. Every graduation. Every apartment. Every new job. Even your wedding. I was there for more than you know. Emily stared toward the photograph from St. Luke's Hospital still resting beside the suitcase. Sarah had carried loneliness like a second skin all these years while secretly orbiting the edges of Emily's life unseen. The hidden observer. Not because she wanted distance. Because guilt convinced her she no longer deserved closeness. Near the bottom of the page, Sarah's handwriting became shakier. The doctors told me last winter my lungs won't recover this time. Funny thing is, dying scares me less than the idea of you opening this suitcase and realizing I let you hate me anyway. Emily's face tightened painfully after reading that line. Then finally the last sentence arrived. But if I had to choose again between losing you forever or risking those men ever hurting you, I would still leave before sunrise every single time. Emily folded the letter carefully after finishing and pressed it against her chest while the storm outside slowly weakened into soft rain. For 19 years she believed Sarah abandoned her without looking back. But the truth was far crueler than abandonment. Sarah loved her enough to disappear. Emily stopped reading for 2 full days after the letter about the gambling debts. The suitcase remained open on the kitchen table exactly where she left it, but something inside her could no longer move through the memories the same way. Every object now carried unbearable weight. The broken necklace. The money order receipts. The photographs taken from distance. None of it belonged to a selfish woman anymore. It belonged to someone who spent 19 years disappearing on purpose so another person could remain safe enough to build a life. Emily kept trying to understand what that kind of love even felt like. Outside, Toledo drifted through another cold gray weekend beneath heavy clouds and damp sidewalks. The city looked exhausted in spring. Potholes filled with rainwater. Grocery carts abandoned near bus stops. Neon signs buzzing weakly through fog after midnight. Emily returned to work finally because rent still existed no matter how emotionally shattered someone became. At Miller's Family Grill, she moved slower now. Quieter. Customers noticed. Darlene noticed most of all. One late afternoon between shifts, Darlene slid into the booth across from Emily while she picked absent-mindedly at cold fries during break. "You look like somebody died twice," Darlene muttered softly. Emily stared down at the plate. "Maybe somebody did." Darlene waited patiently. Emily appreciated that too. Real kindness usually sounded quieter than movies made it seem. After a long silence Emily finally spoke. "My sister didn't abandon me." Darlene leaned back slightly. "You sure?" Emily nodded once. "I just found out she spent almost 20 years protecting me from something I never even knew happened." Darlene studied her face carefully. "That sounds heavy." Emily laughed softly under her breath. "It is." Then after a pause she whispered, "I hated her anyway." Neither woman spoke after that. The diner around them continued normally. Coffee cups clinked. Orders shouted from the kitchen. Rain tapped softly against front windows while truck drivers wiped mud from boots near the entrance. Emily suddenly realized something strange about grief. Once truth entered it, the pain didn't disappear. It just changed shape. That night after work Emily returned home and opened the suitcase again for the first time since reading Sarah's confession. She moved slower now. More carefully. Like touching sacred things. At the very bottom beneath folded clothing and old receipts sat one final object she had not examined properly yet. A small cassette recorder wrapped inside a scarf. Emily frowned slightly while lifting it out. The plastic looked scratched with age, but the batteries had been replaced recently. Taped to the side was a note in Sarah's handwriting. "If reading ever becomes too hard, listen instead." Emily sat down slowly beneath the kitchen light while rain drifted softly outside again. Her hands trembled slightly while pressing play. Static crackled through the tiny speaker at first. Then, Sarah's voice filled the apartment for the first time in 19 years. "Hey Emmy." Emily stopped breathing. The voice sounded older. Rougher around the edges. But unmistakably Sarah. Warm. Careful. Tired in a way no photograph could capture. Emily covered her mouth immediately while tears blurred her vision. "I don't really know how to start this," Sarah said softly through the recorder. A weak cough interrupted her briefly. "Guess I already messed up the important parts years ago." Emily lowered her head slowly while listening. Sarah laughed faintly after a moment. "You always hated when people rambled." Another cough. "So I'll try not to." The apartment suddenly felt haunted by tenderness. Sarah's voice moved gently through the room touching objects that had waited 19 years to hear her again. "If you're listening to this, then Linda probably mailed the suitcase after I died. Silence crackled briefly. Sorry about that. I know it's a terrible way to come back into somebody's life. Emily cried quietly now without trying to stop it. Sarah continued. I used to rehearse conversations with you while riding buses between jobs. Thought maybe one day I'd finally show up at your apartment and explain everything right. A small sad laugh escaped her. But years keep getting heavier once people stop knowing how to cross the distance. Emily closed her eyes tightly. She could hear oxygen strain beneath Sarah's breathing now. Long pauses between sentences. The sound of someone physically exhausted but emotionally trying very hard to remain gentle anyway. I saw you at the lake after your divorce, Sarah whispered eventually. Emily looked up instantly. The lake. 5 years earlier after Daniel moved out, Emily spent hours sitting alone near Lake Erie because she could not stand the apartment silence anymore. Sarah had been there too. You looked so tired sitting on that bench, Sarah said softly. I almost sat beside you. Emily pressed trembling fingers against her lips. But every time I got close, Sarah continued, I kept hearing your voice from that last fight before I left. Emily remembered the fight instantly now. She was 13. Angry because Sarah missed another school recital while working overtime. Why are you even here if you're just gonna leave like mom? Emily screamed at her back then without understanding the damage words could do. Sarah never answered. She just cried quietly in the kitchen after Emily slammed the bedroom door. On the recording, Sarah inhaled shakily before speaking again. You were just a kid, she whispered. But I carried that sentence longer than I should have. Emily bowed her head while tears slipped silently onto the kitchen table. Outside, headlights drifted slowly across wet streets below the apartment window. Sarah's voice continued softer now. After enough years pass, guilt starts convincing you people are safer without you showing back up. Another cough. Longer this time. Emily heard rustling paper in the background like Sarah adjusting blankets or medication bottles. Then finally Sarah said the sentence Emily would remember for the rest of her life. I stopped believing I deserved to come home. The word settled through the apartment like winter. Emily stared toward the rusted suitcase while emotion moved slowly through every part of her body. Sarah had not stayed away because she stopped loving her. She stayed away because shame convinced her love no longer gave her permission to return. The recorder clicked softly before another section began. Sarah sounded weaker there. Slower. There's one more thing I never told you, she whispered. Emily straightened slightly. Rain pressed harder against the windows outside. The night I left, Sarah paused for several seconds catching her breath. One of those men told Dad they'd start asking you for favors next if he didn't pay soon. Emily froze completely. The apartment seemed to disappear around her. Sarah's voice trembled slightly for the first time. You were 13, Emmy. Silence filled the recording briefly except for shallow breathing. I packed my bag before sunrise because I knew if I stayed another week, eventually they'd start looking at you the same way they looked at me. Emily shut the recorder off instantly. Not out of anger. Because the truth became physically too painful to hold all at once. She stood abruptly and walked toward the apartment window while rain blurred the city beyond the glass into soft moving lights. Sarah saved her. Completely. Not symbolically. Not emotionally. Literally. Emily wrapped both arms around herself while trying to breathe through the crushing weight of it. For 19 years she hated the person who sacrificed everything so her little sister could grow up untouched by certain kinds of darkness. The realization hollowed something inside her. Later that night around 3 a.m, Emily turned the recorder back on. Sarah's voice returned weaker now. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she whispered. Honestly, I'm not even sure I deserve it. Emily sat beside the kitchen table listening motionlessly beneath weak yellow light. I just needed you to know leaving hurt me too. Another pause. Every single day. The tape crackled softly afterward. Then Sarah spoke one final time, almost too quietly to hear. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Emmy. The recording ended there. No dramatic goodbye. No music. Just static humming faintly through the apartment while rain continued falling over Toledo before dawn. Emily remained sitting beside the suitcase long after the tape stopped spinning. The city outside slowly darkened toward morning while memories rearranged themselves one final time inside her chest. Sarah never ran away from love. She carried it farther than anyone should have to. After hearing Sarah's voice on the cassette tape, the apartment no longer felt like Emily's alone. Every room carried echoes now. The kitchen where she sat crying beside cold coffee at 3 in the morning. The hallway mirror where she stopped recognizing the woman staring back lately. Even the radiator clicking softly through the night sounded different somehow, like memory itself had moved in beside her. Toledo drifted quietly toward early summer while Emily walked through her days carrying grief that no longer felt sharp. It felt deep. Settled into her bones like weather. She still worked shifts at Miller's Family Grill because life demanded ordinary things even after emotional worlds collapsed. Coffee still needed pouring. Rent still existed. Customers still complained about eggs arriving cold. But something fundamental inside Emily had shifted permanently. She no longer moved through the world like somebody abandoned. She moved through it like somebody finally realizing how fiercely they had been loved all along. One evening after closing, Darlene found Emily sitting alone in booth 7 staring out rain-covered windows while neon reflections drifted across empty parking spaces outside. You okay? She asked gently while stacking menus nearby. Emily looked down at the wedding ring still hidden inside her apron pocket months after the divorce finalized. Habit more than attachment now. I think I spent half my life angry at the wrong thing, she whispered softly. Darlene slid into the booth across from her without speaking immediately. Emily appreciated silence more lately. Sarah taught her that accidentally. My sister left because she thought it would keep me safe, Emily continued after a while. And I hated her for it anyway. Darlene watched rain sliding down the diner glass before answering quietly. People don't always know what survival looks like when they're standing outside it. Emily swallowed hard. That sentence followed her all the way home later. 2 days afterward, Emily called Linda in Minnesota again. The woman sounded relieved to hear from her. I've been meaning to ask, Linda said carefully, did you ever decide what you want done with Sarah's apartment? Emily leaned against the kitchen counter while staring toward the open suitcase beneath weak afternoon light. I don't know yet. The landlord's been patient because of her condition, but, Linda hesitated apologetically. Eventually they'll clear it. Emily closed her eyes briefly. The idea of strangers packing Sarah's life into garbage bags suddenly felt unbearable. I'll come, she answered quietly before she could overthink it. 3 days later Emily drove north toward Duluth beneath gray skies and endless highways lined with pine trees and gas stations. The farther she traveled, the more unreal everything began feeling. 19 years of absence reduced finally to a physical destination. Sarah lived here. Coughed here. Slept here. Died here. The realization pressed heavily against Emily's chest during the entire drive. Duluth greeted her with cold lake wind and faded apartment buildings overlooking industrial docks near Lake Superior. Sarah's building sat between a laundromat and an old pharmacy with boarded windows. The hallway smelled faintly of cigarettes, bleach, and radiator heat trapped inside old walls. Linda met her downstairs carrying a small ring of keys. Mid-60s. Tired eyes. Kind voice. She talked about you constantly, she said while leading Emily upstairs slowly. Emily looked down at the worn carpet runner beneath her feet. Seems like everybody knew me except me. Linda gave a sad little smile but didn't answer. Apartment 4C stood at the far end of the hallway beside a flickering exit sign. Linda unlocked the door carefully before stepping aside. Emily entered slowly and stopped moving almost immediately. The apartment was tiny. Smaller than hers in Toledo. One bedroom. Old floral curtains. Mismatched furniture probably gathered from thrift stores over decades. A humidifier sat beside the couch next to several inhalers and folded blankets. Everything inside the apartment looked worn but cared for gently. Like Sarah spent years building softness from almost nothing. Emily walked farther inside quietly while afternoon lake light drifted through thin curtains. Books lined shelves beside stacks of crossword puzzles and old coffee mugs. On the refrigerator hung photographs clipped carefully beneath magnets. Emily froze after seeing them. Newspaper clippings from Toledo. Her high school graduation photo. A blurry picture from her wedding. Even a newspaper advertisement from Miller's Family Grill featuring employees during a charity breakfast fundraiser 3 years earlier. Sarah had clipped it out and saved it. Emily touched the corner of the paper carefully while emotion tightened through her throat again. She followed your life, Linda said softly behind her. Not in a strange way. Emily nodded silently. More like, Linda searched gently for words. Like somebody trying to stay connected to home without believing they could return there. Anymore. Emily walked slowly toward the bedroom afterward. Sarah's bed remained unmade exactly as she left it before the hospital. A half-finished knitting project rested near the pillow beside reading glasses and medication bottles. On the wall above the bed hung one single framed photograph. Emily and Sarah as children standing beside Lake Erie beneath summer sunlight. Sarah had one arm wrapped tightly around little Emily's shoulders while both girls laughed toward the camera. Emily sat carefully on the edge of the bed staring at the photograph while grief moved through her in slow heavy waves. Sarah built an entire life around surviving loneliness quietly. And somehow even at the center of all that loneliness, Emily still remained there. Linda eventually handed her a small envelope found inside Sarah's nightstand. She wrote this during hospice care, Linda explained gently. Told me to wait until you came here personally. Emily accepted the envelope carefully with trembling fingers. Sarah's handwriting across the front looked weaker than before. For Emmy. Only if she comes herself. Emily opened it slowly while sitting beside the bed. Inside rested one final letter folded neatly into thirds. Emmy, if you're reading this inside my apartment, then you came farther for me than I ever expected. Emily lowered her eyes briefly before continuing. I used to imagine what this moment would feel like. Honestly, I thought maybe you'd walk in angry. Maybe relieved I was finally gone. But part of me hoped you'd sit on the edge of my bed exactly where you are now and finally understand I never stopped being your sister. Tears blurred Emily's vision softly. Outside, fog rolled slowly across Lake Superior beyond the apartment windows. Sarah's words continued carefully. I know you probably wish I'd come home sooner. I wish that too. But shame gets heavier every year people stay gone. Eventually it stops feeling like a bridge you can cross back over. Emily pressed trembling fingers against the paper while listening to the old apartment radiator hum softly through the walls. Then near the bottom, Sarah wrote the sentence that finally broke something open completely inside her. You spent 19 years believing I abandoned you. The truth is, I spent 19 years missing you. Emily bowed forward slowly while tears slipped silently onto the letter in her hands. Not loud crying. Just quiet grief finally reaching the place resentment used to live. Linda stood quietly near the doorway pretending not to notice. Sarah's final lines were shorter. Shakier. If you can forgive me someday, let it be because you finally understand I left as your sister, and I stayed away because I still was. Emily folded the letter carefully after finishing and looked around the tiny apartment one final time. The loneliness inside the room suddenly felt enormous. Sarah died here carrying memories instead of people. Yet somehow she never let bitterness touch the way she loved Emily. That realization healed and devastated her at the same time. Before leaving, Emily opened the bedroom dresser slowly. Inside lay Sarah's half of the silver necklace wrapped inside tissue paper beside old photographs and bus passes faded with age. Emily stared at it quietly before removing her own necklace from beneath her sweater. For the first time in 19 years, she held both broken halves together inside trembling hands. The chain still fit perfectly. Emily drove back to Toledo beneath soft morning fog rolling across the highway while Sarah's suitcase rested quietly in the passenger seat beside her. The drive felt different this time. Slower somehow. Not because traffic changed. Because grief had finally stopped fighting the truth. For 19 years Emily carried anger like armor. Now that armor was gone, and beneath it she found something far more painful. Love unfinished. The kind that keeps existing long after people disappear. Rain drifted lightly against the windshield near the Ohio border while old radio stations faded in and out through static. Emily kept thinking about Sarah's apartment in Duluth. The unfinished knitting project beside the bed. The carefully clipped newspaper articles taped to the refrigerator. The way loneliness had settled softly into every corner without ever hardening Sarah completely. That hurt Emily most of all. Her sister suffered quietly for years and still remained gentle. Still remembered birthdays. Still saved photographs. Still worried whether Emily wore warm enough coats during winter. By the time she reached Toledo, evening sunlight had already begun fading behind gray clouds. The apartment smelled stale after several days empty. Emily carried the suitcase inside carefully and placed it back onto the kitchen table where the story first began. But now the room felt transformed somehow. The rusted case no longer looked mysterious. It looked tired. Like something that spent too many years protecting memories alone. Emily unpacked slowly over the next few days. She folded Sarah's sweaters into drawers instead of storage boxes. Placed the old photographs inside frames around the apartment. Repaired the broken chain connecting both halves of the silver necklace at a small jewelry shop downtown run by an elderly Korean man who barely asked questions when he noticed tears in her eyes. "Important piece?" he asked gently while examining the chain beneath a lamp. Emily nodded once. "Very." He handed it back 2 days later polished carefully until the silver caught light again. That night Emily stood alone before the bathroom mirror fastening both halves around her neck for the first time since childhood. The chain rested heavier than she expected. Not physically. Emotionally. Like memory finally settling where it belonged. Summer arrived quietly after that. Toledo warmed beneath long evenings and thunderstorms drifting over Lake Erie while Emily slowly learned how to live without resentment defining her anymore. Some days grief still struck unexpectedly. In grocery stores. At traffic lights. While hearing certain songs Sarah used to hum absent-mindedly in the trailer kitchen years ago. But the pain no longer felt poisoned. It felt human. One Saturday morning Emily drove back to the old trailer park carrying flowers she almost didn't buy because Sarah always said cut flowers were money dying politely in water. The thought made Emily laugh softly while parking beside Lot 17 beneath pale sunlight. The trailer looked emptier now than she remembered. Smaller too. Mrs. Donahue still lived across the road smoking cigarettes on her porch swing. She waved slowly after spotting Emily. "You look lighter," the older woman said quietly when Emily walked over. Emily glanced toward the old trailer. "I don't know if lighter's the word." Mrs. Donahue nodded like she understood anyway. They sat together a while without speaking much while children rode bikes through cracked pavement nearby exactly like they used to decades earlier. Eventually Emily reached into her purse and handed Mrs. Donahue one of Sarah's photographs. Sarah standing beside a bus station in winter wearing a knitted hat and exhausted smile beneath falling snow. Mrs. Donahue stared at the picture for a long moment before pressing trembling fingers gently against the edge. She always smiled like she was apologizing for something, the woman whispered softly. Emily swallowed hard after hearing that because it felt painfully true. Before leaving, Emily walked alone behind the trailer toward the rusted swing set where she and Sarah used to sit during summer nights listening to freight trains pass through town. Grass had grown tall around the poles now. One swing still moved slightly in the wind. Emily sat there quietly beneath warm afternoon light with both halves of the necklace resting against her chest beneath her shirt. For a long time she simply listened. Wind through dead grass. Distant barking dogs. Children laughing somewhere farther down the road. Ordinary sounds continuing through a world Sarah no longer occupied physically. Emily finally understood then that grief did not end dramatically. It softened slowly into presence. Sarah would always exist now in small things. Coffee left growing cold while reading late at night. Thunderstorms against apartment windows. Worn bus tickets folded inside coat pockets. Quiet acts of protection nobody else noticed. Weeks later, on the first cool evening of September, Emily carried the rusted suitcase down toward Lake Erie just before sunset. The sky glowed pale orange across calm water while gulls drifted low near the shoreline. She found the same bench where she once sat crying after her divorce years earlier without knowing Sarah watched silently from distance. Emily lowered herself onto the weathered wood slowly and placed the suitcase beside her feet. Wind moved gently through her hair while waves struck rocks below in soft steady rhythm. She brought Sarah's final letter with her. The paper had already softened around the folds from being opened too many times. Emily read it again quietly beneath fading light. Not searching for answers anymore. Just listening. Near the end of the letter Sarah had written one sentence Emily somehow missed during the first reading. Home was always wherever you were. Emily looked out across the water afterward while evening settled slowly around the lake. For most of her life she believed Sarah left because she wanted escape. Then she believed Sarah stayed away because she carried shame. But now sitting beside the suitcase beneath quiet September sky, Emily understood something deeper than both. Sarah spent 19 years trying to love her from a distance because distance was the only form of protection she thought she had left to give. Tears came softly again after that realization. Not grief alone this time. Gratitude too. Emily reached down and opened the rusted suitcase one final time. Inside remained only a few letters now, the repaired necklace receipt, and Sarah's old blue scarf folded carefully at the bottom. Emily touched the scarf gently before closing the lid again. Around her, evening deepened across Lake Erie while city lights slowly flickered alive along the distant shoreline. Nobody else sat near the water anymore. Just Emily. The suitcase. The sound of waves moving endlessly against stone. After a long while, she rested her hand quietly on top of the rusted case and looked out toward the darkening horizon. You can come home now, she whispered softly into the wind. The lake carried the words away almost immediately. Then silence returned gently around her while the last light disappeared from the water.